Korean Mafia boss's 9-year-old refused surgery unless Black Paramedic was in the room. Doctors couldn't explain why. A 9-year-old boy is pulled from a burning car. His father is one of the most feared crime lords in Seoul. The boy is rushed into the ICU, bleeding, barely conscious, and then he wakes up screaming. Not from the pain, not from the fire. He starts screaming the moment they try to take him to surgery, and he will not stop until one person walks through that door. Not his father, not a family member. A paramedic. A Black woman he met 40 minutes ago at the scene of the explosion. And when the doctors finally get him to stop screaming long enough to explain himself, what he whispers in her ear doesn't just shock the hospital staff. It changes everything. Because the boy doesn't want her there for comfort. He wants her there as a witness. Because he saw who planted the bomb. And it was someone his father trusted with his life. The city of Seoul does not sleep easily on Thursday nights. The streets of Gangnam are slick from an earlier rain, the neon of the bars and restaurants bleeding into the wet asphalt in long, distorted ribbons of light. Traffic moves in lazy patterns. Couples walk arm in arm past glass storefronts. A street vendor on the corner of Tehran Row sells tteokbokki from a steaming cart, the smell of gochujang thick and sweet in the cold November air. Everything looks ordinary. Everything feels ordinary. And then the car on Dosandero explodes. The sound arrives before the light does, a deep, chest-compressing boom that silences the entire block for one suspended second before the screaming starts. The black SUV, a reinforced Hyundai Genesis that costs more than most people in the neighborhood make in 3 years, erupts from the inside out. The rear door blows off its hinges. Glass punches outward in every direction. The frame of the vehicle buckles upward, and the whole structure lurches sideways across 2 lanes before the secondary fuel ignition turns the roof into a horizontal wall of orange fire. People on the sidewalk drop flat. A taxi driver, 2 cars behind, abandons his vehicle without turning off the engine and runs. The street vendor's cart goes over. Someone is already dialing emergency services before the echo of the explosion finishes bouncing between the glass towers overhead. Park Jae-hyun, the man the car was meant to kill, is not in the car. His son is. Im Soo-ho, that is what we'll call the boy, because even in retelling this story, the real name belongs to a child who has already suffered enough. Im Soo-ho is 9 years old. He had been visiting his father at the Dosandero office building, a glass and steel tower that serves as the legitimate corporate face of an empire that has very little legitimate about it. His father runs construction contracts. His father also runs gambling networks, loan enforcement, and political protection schemes that stretch from Seoul to Busan to the port at Incheon. Park Jae-hyun is not a man who announces what he is. He is a man who makes phone calls that get things done, and the people who know what those phone calls mean know better than to say so out loud. Soo-ho had been at the office because it was one of the few places his father allowed him to come. The boy's mother had died 2 years earlier, a car accident that may or may not have been an accident, depending on who you ask and how much they trust their own memory. Since then, Soo-ho lived with his father's sister in a guarded apartment in Apgujeong, and twice a week he was allowed to visit his father in the office tower, where he would sit in a leather chair too big for him and do homework while his father worked. They rarely spoke during these visits, but Soo-ho came anyway, every time. On the night of the explosion, a junior associate named Kim Tae-young had been assigned to drive Soo-ho back to the apartment. Kim Tae-young was 26 years old, 3 years into his employment with the park organization, and by every account a careful and respectful young man who carried himself with the measured discipline of someone who understood the environment he worked in. He had driven Soo-hoo before. The boy liked him because Kim Tae-young never talked down to him and sometimes let him control the radio. The bomb had been placed under the rear passenger seat. It was triggered remotely. The device was sophisticated, not something thrown together in a basement, but something built by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had access to materials that are not available at any hardware store in South Korea. Whoever planted it knew the vehicle, knew the route, knew the schedule. Kim Tae-young died at the scene. Soo-hoo, by some combination of physics and terrible fortune, survived. The blast threw him against the door on the far side of the car, and the door, already weakened at its lower hinge from the explosion, gave way. The boy was ejected sideways onto the curb rather than absorbing the full force of the detonation. He landed on asphalt. He had lacerations across his left arm, a broken collarbone, burns on the back of his neck and the left side of his face, and a head wound that was bleeding heavily enough to soak through his school uniform jacket within the first 2 minutes. He was conscious when she found him. Her name is Adaeze Okonkwo, and for the purposes of this story, we'll call her that, because the character she represents deserves a name that carries weight. Adaeze is 31 years old. She has been a paramedic with Seoul Emergency Medical Services for 4 years, having immigrated from Lagos at 24 on a student visa, completed her emergency medical training, and eventually earned permanent residency through a specialty skills program. She is one of fewer than 30 Black medical professionals working in emergency services in the Seoul metropolitan area. She is also, by the account of every colleague who has ever worked with her, one of the best in the unit. Calm under pressure is the phrase people use most. Not because she feels nothing, but because she has trained herself to process what she feels at the same time as she processes what needs to be done, and the two tracks run parallel without interfering with each other. Adaeze's unit was 3 blocks away when the call came in. She and her partner, a Korean man named Oh Sung-jae, arrived on Dosandero within 90 seconds of dispatch. The street was already chaos. Bystanders frozen at various distances from the burning vehicle, a police cruiser with its lights on, but no officers yet visible, and the car itself still burning in the middle of the road. Adaeze saw the boy before her partner did. He was lying half on the sidewalk and half in the gutter, one arm extended, his head turned to the side. She was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. She crossed the distance at a controlled run, not a sprint, because sprinting to a trauma patient without assessing the environment first is how paramedics become casualties. And she dropped to her knees beside him with her kit already open. He was looking at her. That was the first thing that struck her. Not the blood, not the burns, not the strange angle of his left shoulder that told her immediately the collarbone was broken. The boy was looking directly at her. His eyes were tracking. His lips were moving. She leaned in close to hear what he was saying, and what he was saying was not, "Help me," or "It hurts," or "Where is Kim Tae-young?" What he was saying over and over, in a voice so quiet it barely registered above the noise of the fire and the distant sirens, was, "I saw. I saw. I saw." Adaeze did not ask him what he saw. That was not her job in that moment. Her job was to keep him alive long enough for someone else to ask that question. She assessed his airway. Clear. Breathing. Present. Shallow. Slightly rapid. Circulation. Pulse strong at the carotid, but the head wound needed pressure immediately. She applied a trauma dressing with one hand and called the status to Sung-jae with the other, and within 4 minutes of their arrival, they had the boy stabilized, boarded, and loaded. During the entire time she worked on him, Soo-hoo did not look away from her face. He arrived at Asan Medical Center in stable but critical condition. The attending trauma surgeon, a Dr. Park Hee-soo, ordered immediate imaging and flagged 3 priority concerns: the head wound for potential intracranial bleeding, the collarbone fracture, which appeared clean but required confirmation, and the burns on his neck and face, which were second degree across roughly 12% of the relevant surface area. The burns, Dr. Park noted, would require surgical debridement within the next few hours to prevent infection and minimize scarring. The boy's father arrived at the hospital 22 minutes after his son. Park Jae-hyun came with 4 men who were not security in any official sense, but who stationed themselves in the hallway outside the ICU with the practiced stillness of people accustomed to waiting in hallways. The father himself was composed in the way that extremely dangerous men are often composed. Not calm exactly, but controlled. His face showed nothing. He stood at the window of his son's room and looked at the boy through the glass and said nothing for a long time. Then he asked Dr. Park when they could perform the surgery on the burns. Dr. Park told him they were preparing now and hoped to have the boy in the OR within the next 2 hours. Park Jae-hyun nodded. He asked if his son was awake. Dr. Park said yes, intermittently. The boy was drifting in and out of sedation from the pain management protocol. The father said he wanted to speak with his son before surgery. Dr. Park said that would be fine, that brief visits were permitted. The father went in. He stayed for 4 minutes. When he came out, his face was still composed, but something had shifted behind his eyes. A tightening, a recalculation. He did not share what his son had said to him. He returned to the hallway and spoke quietly to one of his men in a voice too low for the nursing staff to catch. Then he went to the family waiting area and sat down. 2 hours later, when the surgical team came to transport Soo-hoo to the OR, the boy woke up. He did not wake up groggy or confused the way sedated children sometimes do. He woke up alert, oriented, and terrified. Not the loose, disorganized terror of a child who doesn't understand what's happening, but something focused and purposeful. He grabbed the bed rail with his good arm. He looked at the surgical team, and he said, clearly and loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear, "I'm not going unless she comes." The charge nurse, a woman named Bae Jong-un, who had worked the ICU for 11 years and had seen most things a hospital hallway can produce, leaned down and asked him who he meant. "The one who helped me," Soo-hoo said. "The black paramedic, the one with the short hair. She has to come. I won't go without her." Bae Jong-un looked at the surgical team. The surgical team looked at each other. Nobody had a protocol for this. They tried reasoning with him first. Bae Jong-un explained, with the careful patience of someone who has explained medical procedures to frightened children before, that paramedics don't typically come into operating rooms, that the people who would be with him were doctors and nurses who were very good at their jobs, that he would be asleep and wouldn't know who was in the room anyway. Soo-hoo listened to all of this without blinking, and when she finished, he said, "I won't go." They tried sedation. The attending physician, a Dr. Yoon, ordered a mild anxiolytic to help the boy calm down enough to be transported. Soo-hoo accepted the injection without resistance, and then, 40 seconds later, looked at Dr. Yoon and said, "I'm still not going without her." Someone thought to contact the paramedic unit and find out if Adeze Okonkwo was still at the hospital. She was. Standard protocol after a major trauma delivery included a debrief session with the receiving team, and she and Sung-jae had been in the administrative wing finishing paperwork. When the call came through asking her to come to the ICU, phrased with some awkwardness as "the patient is requesting your presence," Adeze set down her paperwork, looked at Sung Jae, and walked to the elevator. She came through the ICU door, and the boy's eyes found her immediately. Something in him visibly relaxed. The grip on the bed rail loosened. His breathing slowed. He watched her cross the room toward him with an expression that Bae Jong-un later described as, and this is her word exactly, relief. Not the relief of a child seeing a familiar face. The relief of someone who has been waiting for a specific person to arrive before they could do something they needed to do. Adeze came to the side of the bed. She looked at the boy, really looked at him, the way she had looked at him on the street, taking in everything at once. And she said, in the even, unhurried tone she used with all her patients, "I'm here. You okay?" Suhu said, "Will you stay? For the surgery? Can you be in the room?" Adeze looked at Dr. Yoon. Dr. Yoon looked at the surgical team. There was a rapid, quiet conversation in the hallway that Adeze was not part of. Then Dr. Yoon came back and said that, given the circumstances, they could arrange for the paramedic to be present in a non-clinical capacity, observational, away from the surgical field, appropriately gowned. Suhu nodded. He released the bed rail. They prepped him for transport. But before they moved him, before the gurney wheels started rolling, the boy turned his face toward Adeze and beckoned her closer with one finger. The gesture was small, deliberate, and strangely adult. She leaned in. He put his mouth close to her ear. What he said was not about comfort. It was not about fear of the operating table or the anesthesia or the strange faces of the surgical team. What he said, in a voice so quiet that only she could hear it, was, "I don't need you there because I'm scared. I need you there because you're a witness. You don't work for my father. Nobody owns you. I need someone in that room who can't be paid to forget." Adeze straightened up slowly. She looked at the boy's face. He held her gaze without flinching. "I saw the man who put the bomb in the car," Suhu said, "and I need someone to know, in case something happens to me in there." There are moments in a person's professional life that recontextualize everything that came before them. For Adeze, this was that moment. The room was the same room. The boy was the same boy. The hospital smelled the same, and the fluorescent lights were the same, and Dr. Yoon and Bae Jong-un were standing in the same positions they had been standing in 30 seconds ago. And yet, everything had completely shifted. The way a photograph shifts when you realize the background contains something you missed the first time. She kept her face neutral. She had trained herself to do this, and right now that training was doing significant work. She leaned back in, close to his ear. "Tell me the name." Suhu told her the name. It was a name she did not recognize. But the way the boy said it, with the particular flatness of a child who has spent his short life in an environment where certain names are spoken very carefully, told her everything she needed to know about the weight of it. "I saw him," Suhu said. "I was in the elevator." "The parking level camera is broken. It's been broken for 2 weeks because my father's security man said they would fix it and didn't. I went down to get something from the car, a book I left. I saw him on his knees next to the car. He didn't see me. I went back upstairs. I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe he dropped something. And then the car went with Kim Tae-young and it..." He stopped. His jaw worked. "And it was supposed to be my father," he said. "Kim Tae-young was only in it because he was taking me home. The bomb wasn't for him." Adeze was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "I'm going to stay with you, the whole time, and when you wake up, We're going to figure out what to do next. Together. All right? Suhu looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. They took him to surgery. Adeze Okonkwo stood in the corner of that operating room in a surgical gown and a mask, and she watched Park Im-Suhu's surgery from beginning to end. She stood still for the entire 3 hours and 40 minutes it took to debride and dress the burns, to set and pin the collarbone, to clean and close the head wound. She did not speak. She did not look away. She was, as the boy had asked her to be, a witness. She was also, during those 3 hours and 40 minutes, doing something else entirely. She was thinking through every available option with the systematic clarity that made her exceptional at her job. The problem was layered in ways that made it genuinely dangerous. Whatever Suhu had told her, whatever name he had given her, acted on that information carelessly meant taking it to people who could not be trusted to receive it safely. The police in Seoul were not a monolith. There were officers, and there were officers. And an organization like the Park Group had, over decades, made careful investments in the difference between the two. Taking the boy's account directly to the authorities was not automatically safe. Taking it to the boy's father was not safe, for obvious reasons. If the man Suhu had named was someone inside Park Jae-hyun's own organization, then the father was either already aware of the betrayal or was the last person who should receive the information without independent corroboration. Because if the wrong people found out the boy had talked, the threat to Suhu did not diminish after surgery. It increased. She thought about Sungjae. Her partner was a careful person, someone she trusted. But this was not a situation where trust in a person was the relevant variable. This was a situation where the variable was institutional reach. Who could receive this information, act on it, and contain it without it getting back to the wrong set of ears within the next 48 hours? She thought about the name Suhu had given her. She turned it over in her mind the way you turn over an unfamiliar coin, examining both faces. By the time the surgical team was closing the final suture, and Dr. Yoon was calling out final vitals in the satisfied tone of a surgeon whose work has gone well, Adeze had made a decision. She was not going to move precipitously. She was going to wait until the boy was out of recovery and lucid, confirm what he had told her, and then contact the one person she could think of whose institutional position gave them both the authority and the insulation to act on this without the information bleeding sideways. That person was a woman named Inspector Choi Ji-young, a senior investigator with the Serious Crimes Unit of the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency. Adeze had met Inspector Choi 8 months earlier, after a separate incident involving a trafficking victim she had transported, a case in which Inspector Choi had distinguished herself by refusing to share case information with a superior who Adeze later learned had ties to the suspect. Adeze had no way of knowing if Inspector Choi was perfectly clean. Nobody in any large institution is perfectly clean. But Inspector Choi had, in the one case Adeze had observed directly, chosen the right thing over the convenient thing. That was not nothing. In a situation like this, that was very close to everything. Suhu came out of anesthesia 2 hours after surgery ended. He was groggy, unfocused, asking for water. The nursing team attended to him. His father's people were in the hallway. Park Jae-hyun himself had been in the family waiting area the entire time, and now he was speaking quietly with one of his men near the nursing station. And Adeze noticed, because she noticed everything in a situation she was actively processing, that the conversation stopped when she came out of the recovery unit and did not resume until she moved past. She went to the staff bathroom at the end of the hall. She locked the door. She took out her phone and she called Inspector Choi Ji-young's direct number, which she had kept in her contacts since the trafficking case. Inspector Choi picked up on the third ring. Adeze kept it brief. She said she had a witness to a bombing that occurred earlier that evening on Dos Sandero, that the witness was a minor, that the information the witness carried implicated a named individual who was part of the Park Jae-hyun organization, and that she had serious concerns about the safety of both the witness and the integrity of any investigation that went through standard channels without prior containment measures. She said she needed Inspector Choi to come to Asan Medical Center, and she needed her to come quietly, without filing a report in advance, and without informing her immediate supervisor until they had spoken in person. There was a pause on the line. Then Inspector Choi said, "I'll be there in 40 minutes." She was there in 32. They met in a consultation room on a different floor from the ICU, far enough away that any observer stationed near the boy's room would not immediately connect the meeting to the patient upstairs. Inspector Choi Ji-young was 44 years old, small and precise in the way of a person who has learned to make her presence felt through attention rather than volume. She wore civilian clothes. She had been off duty when Adeze called, and she came alone. She sat down across from Adeze, and she put her phone face down on the table between them, which was a gesture that Adeze appreciated more than she could easily articulate. Adeze told her everything: the scene on Dos Sandero, the boy, what he had said before surgery, the name. Inspector Choi did not write anything down. She listened with the focused stillness of someone whose memory is their primary instrument. When Adeze finished, the inspector sat for a moment in silence. "The name he gave you," Inspector Choi said. "Has the boy stated this directly to his father?" "I don't know what he said to his father before I arrived. When the father visited him before surgery, alone, I wasn't present. Whatever happened in that room, only 2 people know." Inspector Choi absorbed this. "And the boy's current condition?" "He's in recovery. He's going to be fine physically. The burns are managed, the fracture is set. He'll need follow-up procedures, probably 2 or 3 more sessions on the burns over the next month. But tonight, he's stable." "And he asked you specifically to be a witness, not to call police, not to tell his father, a witness." Those were his words. He wanted someone in that room who couldn't be bought. Inspector Choi looked at Adeze for a moment with an expression that was hard to read. Something between professional respect and something more personal. A recognition of what it had cost this woman to carry this information alone through a 3-hour surgery without visibly doing so. "You did the right thing calling me," Inspector Choi said. "And I want you to know that I understand the specific nature of the risk you took in doing so. I'm not going to minimize that." "I need to know if he's safe," Adeze said. "Not in a general sense. Specifically, tonight. If the person he named finds out the boy is talking, he won't," Inspector Choi said. "Not from my end. And I'm going to make some calls right now that will change the security configuration around this room in a way that will not look like it has anything to do with the boy's account. It will look like standard protocol for the child of a high-profile individual following an attack. Nobody will question it." She stood up. "I need to speak with him," she said, "as soon as he's lucid enough, with you present if that's what he needs. I'll handle the hospital administration and the father's team, not directly, but through channels that won't raise flags." Adeze nodded. "There's one more thing," Inspector Choi said, and she said it carefully, with the deliberateness of someone who is sharing something that cost them something to share. "The name the boy gave you. I know that name. I have been building a file on that individual for 14 months. I have had nothing that could survive a legal threshold." She paused. "A 9-year-old eyewitness who has nothing to gain and everything to lose by lying is not nothing. That is very far from nothing." They went back upstairs separately. Adeze sat with Suhu through the rest of the evening. The boy slept, woke, slept again. At some point, his father came to the doorway and looked in at Adeze sitting in the chair beside the bed, and the look he gave her was not hostile, but it was assessing, the look of someone cataloging information about a person they have not yet decided how to categorize. Adeze met his eyes without looking away. Then Park Jae-hyun turned and walked back to the waiting area, and Adeze exhaled once, quietly, and looked back at the sleeping boy. Around 2 a.m, Soo-hoo woke up and was fully lucid for the first time since the surgery. He looked at the ceiling. Then he turned his head and looked at Adeze. "You're still here," he said. "I'm still here." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the room, the ICU hummed with the low-level industry of a hospital in the small hours. The soft percussion of monitors, the distant exchanges of the nursing staff, the faint squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. "Did you tell anyone?" he asked. "Yes," Adeze said. "I told a police inspector, a specific one, someone I have reason to trust. She's here." Soo-hoo absorbed this without visible alarm. He had already processed most of his available alarm in the back of a burning car, and what was left in him now was something quieter and more durable. "Will she use my name?" he asked. "She will eventually need your testimony," Adeze said, "but she understands the situation. She's not going to do anything that puts you in a worse position than you're already in." The boy was quiet again for a while. Then, "I liked Kim Tae-young. He used to let me pick the music." Adeze said nothing. She let that land in the room and sit there the way it deserved to. "It was supposed to be my father," Soo-hoo said again. Not with anger, with the particular flatness of a child who has been growing up faster than anyone should have to. "They wanted to kill my father, and now Kim Tae-young is dead. And the man who did it, he's probably in this hospital right now." "He's not in this hospital," Adeze said. "I made sure of that." Soo-hoo looked at her. "How?" "By calling someone who made a phone call that changed the access list for this floor. Quietly. Routine security upgrade for a high-risk patient. Standard protocol." She paused. Nobody questioned it. The boy studied her face for a moment with those dark, exhausted eyes. "You're very smart," he said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was an observation, the kind you make when someone has handled the situation the way you hoped they would, and you want to acknowledge it without making it sentimental. "I've been doing this job for a while," Adeze said. Inspector Choi came in at 4 a.m. She sat down on the opposite side of the bed from Adeze, and she introduced herself to Soo-hoo not as a police officer first, but as a person who had been told by someone the boy trusted that he had something important to say, and that he wanted to say it to someone who would take it seriously. She used simple language. She looked directly at him. She did not take out a recorder or a notepad. Soo-hoo told her what he had seen. He told it cleanly, without embellishment, in the precise sequential way of someone who has been going over the memory repeatedly to make sure he hasn't confused any detail. The parking level, the broken camera, the man on his knees beside the car, the specific posture, both hands underneath the rear chassis, leaning inward, face turned away. The jacket the man was wearing, which Soo-hoo recognized because the man wore it frequently and it had a distinctive collar. The time. He knew the time because he had checked his phone coming out of the elevator, texting a classmate about something entirely unrelated to the evening that would follow. Inspector Choi listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "You understand that what you've told me is very serious, and that I'm going to need you to be willing to say it again, formally, in a process that will protect you, but will also require you to be very brave for a period of time." "I know," Suhu said. "Your father will need to know eventually," she said. "Not yet, but eventually." "I know that too." Inspector Choi glanced at Adeze. Then she looked back at the boy. "Why didn't you tell your father when he came to see you before surgery?" Suhu was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved to the ceiling. "Because the man I saw," he said slowly, "my father trusts him more than he trusts almost anyone. And I don't know, I didn't know, if my father would believe me, or if he would—" He stopped, started again. "Or if he would do something that couldn't be undone before anyone could think about it properly." Inspector Choi nodded. She understood exactly what the boy meant. A 9-year-old whose father runs an organization built on enforcement had a very clear understanding of what happened when his father received information about betrayal. The speed of that response was part of the power. It was also part of the danger when the information was arriving incomplete through a traumatized child in a hospital room at midnight. "You protected your father," Adeze said quietly. Suhu looked at her. "I protected Kim Tae-young," he said. "It's too late for Kim Tae-young, but maybe it's not too late for someone else." The investigation that followed was conducted with extraordinary care. Inspector Choi worked it from a parallel track, using the bombing itself as the primary anchor of inquiry, with the boy's account held separately and sealed until independent forensic evidence could be developed to corroborate it. She did not tell her direct supervisor for 5 days. She told one colleague, a man she had worked with for 9 years who she trusted with her career and, on this occasion, with considerably more than that. The forensic team working the Dosan-dero site recovered fragments of the detonation device that pointed toward a specific construction material, a commercial-grade compound used in demolition contracts. The park organization ran construction contracts. This was not, by itself, evidence of anything. The same compound could be sourced through a dozen different supply chains, but it narrowed a field. The security footage from the building's upper floors, the parking level camera was indeed broken, as Suhu had said, but the stairwell camera 1 level above was not, showed a figure in a distinctive jacket entering and exiting the parking level during the relevant window. The jacket was visible for less than 4 seconds of footage, but 4 seconds was enough. The man was named Han Byung-chul. He was 41 years old, and he had been with the park organization for 16 years. He was not Park Jae-hyun's second in command. He was not even in the top tier of the organization's hierarchy. But he was close to the center in a different way. He was a logistics coordinator, a man who knew where everyone went and when, who handled schedules and routes and the small mechanical details that keep a large operation synchronized. He was the kind of person who knew which camera on the parking level had been broken for 2 weeks because he was the person who had decided it did not need to be fixed yet. He was also, Inspector Choi's 14 months of background work revealed, quietly and very carefully in contact with a rival organization based in Incheon that had been trying to move into Seoul territory for the better part of 3 years. The arrest was made 11 days after the bombing. It was made quietly, on a Tuesday morning, while Han Byung-chul was at a meeting in a coffee shop in Mapogu that had nothing to do with anything criminal, the banal juxtaposition that characterizes most moments of consequence in actual human life. 2 plainclothes officers sat down at his table. He went with them without making a scene. He was, by all accounts, unsurprised. People who have been waiting for a particular knock on a particular door often are. Park Jae-hyun was informed the same day, not by Inspector Choi, by a different officer, through official channels, following standard notification protocol for victims of crimes under active investigation. The notification was made in careful legal language that communicated the fact of the arrest and the suspect without volunteering the source of the information that led to it. The account of what happened when Park Jae-hyun received this notification is something that exists in second and third-hand form, filtered through the accounts of people who were present at varying distances. What is known is that he was alone in his office when he was told, that he asked no questions, that he sat for a long time in his chair after the officer left, and that he then asked for his car, a different driver, and went to the hospital. He came to his son's room alone. No escorts in the hallway this time. Just Park Jae-hyun in a gray coat, standing in the doorway of his son's room. Adeze was there. She had been at the hospital daily since the night of the surgery, partly because Soo-ho had asked her to come back, and partly because she had, in the course of everything that had happened, developed a fierce and specific protectiveness toward this child that she was not entirely sure how to categorize professionally, but did not intend to argue with personally. Park Jae-hyun looked at his son. Then he looked at Adeze. He said, "I'd like a moment with my son." Adeze looked at Soo-ho. The boy gave her a small nod. She stood up. She walked to the door. She passed Park Jae-hyun at a distance of about 2 feet, and in that distance she was aware of him in the way you are aware of a large, very still thing. The physical fact of what he was, what he represented, the history of decisions that had constructed the particular person standing in this hallway, in this hospital, in the aftermath of a bomb that had killed a young man and burned his son's face. She stood outside the room. The door was not entirely closed. She heard Park Jae-hyun sit down. She heard the chair creak. There was silence for a long time. Then she heard the father's voice, low and stripped of everything that made it professionally formidable, reduced to something that sounded like what it actually was, a man in a hospital room next to his injured child. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Soo-hoo's answer was quiet enough that she couldn't fully hear it, but she heard the shape of it, the long, careful explanation of a 9-year-old who had made a calculation about his father and decided to trust a stranger instead, and was now accounting for that decision honestly. The silence afterward was very long. Then Park Jae-hyun said something she heard clearly, because it was said in a voice that didn't try to be quiet. "You were right not to tell me." After everything, the explosion, the boy's refusal, the surgery, the hours in the consultation room with Inspector Choi, the careful forensic work that followed, the arrest, those 5 words from a man not accustomed to saying them might have been the most remarkable thing that happened in the entire sequence of events. A 9-year-old boy, pulled from a burning car, had understood his father and his world more clearly than the adults around him, had made a precise judgment about what information to share with whom and when, and had been right in every particular. And his father, to his credit, knew it. Adeze went back to her shift. She went back to the streets of Seoul, to the ambulance and the kit and the dispatch calls and the bodies on the ground that needed what she had to give them. She went back to the ordinary, extraordinary labor of keeping people alive long enough for their lives to continue. She visited Soo-hoo twice more before he was discharged, once for a follow-up dressing procedure, once just to sit with him for an hour while he did homework in the hospital bed, the same homework he had been doing in his father's office on the evening of the bombing. He was still behind on the same assignment. He showed it to her, and she helped him work through part of it, and they sat together in the quiet of the hospital room, with the city going about its business outside the window. And neither of them talked about what had happened, because they didn't need to. On the day of his discharge, Suhu's aunt came to collect him. She was a small, reserved woman who communicated primarily through precise and economic gestures, and she shook Adese's hand at the door of the room with a firmness that said more than anything she could have put into words. Suhu shook her hand too. He held it for a moment. "You came back," he said. "I said I would," Adese said. "Yeah." He let go of her hand. He picked up his bag with his good arm. The collarbone was healing but still in a brace. But people say that a lot. He walked out with his aunt. At the end of the hallway, he turned around once and looked at her. She raised one hand. He turned back and kept walking. Inspector Choi Ji-young's case against Han Byung-chol proceeded through the legal system with the meticulous patience that serious cases require. Suhu's account was ultimately submitted as part of a broader evidentiary package that also included forensic material, financial records connecting Han to the Incheon organization, and the partial stairwell footage. The boy was not required to testify in open court, an arrangement that Inspector Choi had negotiated with some difficulty and considerable persistence, on the grounds that exposing a minor witness who was also the child of the primary target created a risk profile that no court-appointed security arrangement could adequately mitigate. A deposition, conducted in a sealed setting with strictly controlled attendance, served in its place. Han Byung-chol was convicted. The conviction carried a sentence that those who followed the case considered appropriate to what he had done and what he had intended. Kim Tae-young's family received a formal acknowledgement from the court. It was not enough. It is never enough. But it was something. Park Jae-han's organization continued to exist because organizations like his do not dissolve because one man inside them is arrested. Inspector Choi continued to work. The file that would never entirely close remained open. And somewhere in the city, in a guarded apartment in Apgujeong, doing homework and listening to music and growing up at the pace that all 9-year-olds grow, whether the world makes room for it or not, Suhu lived his life forward from what had happened to him. He would carry the scars from the burns on his neck and face for the rest of his life. He would carry the memory of Kim Tae-young and the broken camera and the shape of a man in a familiar jacket crouched beside a car in a parking structure. He would carry the memory of waking up in an ICU and deciding, with the precise and unclouded judgment that sometimes lives in people before experience complicates it, that the one person in the building he could fully trust was a black paramedic he had met 40 minutes ago. He would carry all of it. And so would she.
Hello, welcome to the Quiet Blue Stories. I believe that you enjoyed the story that you just finished watching now. If you enjoy it, I want you to like and subscribe and share this video so that you can always be updated once we upload our next video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.